Hello everyone, excited to be here with you today. My name is Sarah Pavelka and I am going to do about a 40-minute maybe webinar on the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle. So settle in, hope you enjoy. I am a faculty member for the Compass PTN and have about 20 years of experience in operations and clinical improvement through the Iowa Healthcare Collaborative and other organizations. So happy to share my experiences with you, and if you have any questions at the end of this presentation will be my contact information, and I am more than happy to help you guys at any point in time. So let's go ahead and get started. So when we talk about the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle, we'll talk a little bit about the background and the content, where did it come from, and what do you need to have, more of a foundation, if you will. Also talk about change within the process, and then we will break down the Plan, Do, Study, Act process for improvement and talk about some tools that we can use. So let's talk a little bit about background and context to improvement, process improvement, performance improvement, and what it really takes to lay some of the foundational framework with the Plan, Do, Study, Act. So the first thing is there are a lot of improvement strategies out there on the on the market, if you will. You can see them listed there on the left-hand side of the screen, and there's about as many improvement methodologies and strategies as there are tools to be able to help you fix your organization. There's also benefits to each one. Each one comes with some positive attributes and a purpose for its intended use. The key is, I should say there are two keys to this, is to know which and when to use each one. And it's okay to mix and match. It's okay to use multiple ones. And again, don't be afraid to try. The big thing with some of the other methodologies, such as patient-centered medical home, or maybe Lean and Plan, Do, Study, Act, is they all have methods or systematic ways of improving processes or the way we do our work. And you want to stick to those methods, but again, use multiple tools if you feel you need to. So the first thing we need to focus on, there needs to be a culture of process improvement. So in other words, people are open to change. People are open to saying, yeah, I want to do a better job. I want to provide better care. I want to provide better services. Each one of these, the Plan, Do, Study, Act, Lean, and Six Sigma, provide a culture where improvement is just normal. It's not seen as a bad thing, it's actually seen as a positive, and we really can move forward within our organization and provide some great quality services. But it does take a few foundational pieces. First one is systems thinking, understanding the system from how are we connected. How does one part of the organization affect the other part, and the work that we do affect each other? We need to understand change, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today. We'll also talk a little bit about leadership, and then last but not least, it takes a defined process such as PDSA, Lean, and Six Sigma, and you need to use tools within that process. So the process, PDSA, Lean, Six Sigma, and today we're going to talk about PDSA in this video. But think of that as a road, maybe a highway, and that we know that we would drive different vehicles down that highway. Those are the different tools that we can use. So we need a defined process, a road, and you need defined tools or vehicles. So you need really both. And again, it's okay to mix and match the tools, but we really want to find and define one method or one road for our organization and really stick with it. So where did a lot of this come from? Well, most of the work with the Plan, Do, Study, Act came from a gentleman by the name of Edward Deming. He created what he calls the theory of profound knowledge. And it really talks about we have a foundation within this profound knowledge. We have to understand the customer. We have to understand what they want, where they want it, who they are, what are their needs. And we need to understand how that system reacts to that customer, and so how we meet those needs. We need to understand if there's variation within the system and even maybe within the customer. We have knowledge and information. We need to plan for change. And last but not least, people need to do the work. So he talked about these 6 pieces of foundation principles that we need to understand about our system and about our organization. His theory and his work is one of the most notable. Out of it comes the method of the Plan, Do, Study, Act. He also created what he calls Deming's leadership points, or 14 points. These are great leadership skills. You can still read them today, very applicable today on how to guide organizations. But it really gave us the fact that leaders are involved in this process and they need to continue to be engaged. We also introduced the idea of statistical process control. So here again, you see variation within an organization. Do we have normal variation, or do we have common variation? But his theory was that 85% of the processes that are made, or the mistakes that are made in process, are due to processes. Only 15% of the mistakes that are made are actually due to human error, or humans just not thinking. And so we think about the fact that 85% of what we do and the errors that are made are due to a process error. Deming also talked about if we start with improving quality, it will ultimately improve productivity. It will help us decrease a cost, increase profit, decrease price, market share, and then ultimately the opportunity to stay in business. If we don't have good quality, we're faced with defects and rework and dissatisfaction, which takes away from our productivity and our costs. And so we need to think about the fact that we really wholeheartedly need to start with our quality, and it drives everything that we do. We also need to start with, does that mission or vision and values reflect a concept of quality? And so those should be guiding forces for how we actually improve in our organization and what we do. So it should push us to our mission, achieve our vision, and help us with our followers' values. So that was a little background and framework for the Plan, Do, Study, Act. So let's talk about the Plan, Do, Study, Act itself. Here is a very simplified model of the Plan, Do, Study, Act. We in clinical care are very good at this model. We've used it all the time. If you think about that, we have a patient come in maybe to our clinic setting, and we go through an assessment process. What's bringing them in? What's the problem? Then we go through some tests and say, what's our data? What's our current state? What's our numbers telling us? We then go through a diagnosis and be able to say, what's really wrong. And so that part is done in the plan. And then we decide, okay, let's try this. Maybe it's a medication. So that would be the do, that treatment plan. Then we say to the patient, we need to come back. We need to make sure it's really working. So we study it. We have them come back. We follow up with them. And then we act on it. Did it work? Should we keep going? Did we move in the right direction? So this is very similar to our process of working with a patient. So Plan, Do, Study, Act. We do it quite naturally. We don't even think about that maybe we're moving through these different phases. But when it comes to improving our business processes, we often find that we forget to use these steps. And so we need to remember to go back and use these phases or these steps for overall work process improvement. So So what are some of the benefits of the Plan, Do, Study Act? Well, first of all, it's easy to use. It is a cycle of improvement, kind of never ending, and we've mentioned that it's already part of life problem solving. It does give us a road for how we're going to improve. So again, directions from point A to point B. We also can use multiple tools, not necessarily all from the Plan, Do, Study Act. We can steal a little bit from Lean and Six Sigma in here as well. But it really reduces our concept of ready, fire, aim, instead of ready, aim, fire. But when we get the fire ahead of the aim, we end up doing what we call trial and error. And our job is to reduce that trial and error. So here you see a concept of Plan, Do, Study, Act. The first four pieces contribute to the plan. The second two are the do, the theory of improvement. Step 7 is the study the results. And then last but not least, 8 and 9 contribute to the act. And so this is a little bit more broken down. Instead of just the 4 phases, you see the actual 9 steps. A very worthwhile focus, and this is a great slide to kind of keep in your back pocket. So when you start to think about process improvement, what we would do is just simply walk through each of those steps. Start with number 1, move to 2, 3, 4, which sounds simple, but for many of us, again, we forget that this is a kind of a common process. And so today, at the end of this, we are actually going to break this 9 steps down and give you a few things to do with your process improvement. There's also many tools that we can use. So again, having a path, a road get us from A to B, but then we need those vehicles or those tools to drive down. We need to understand multiple tools. This is kind of a hot list. They're not all of them inclusive. There's literally hundreds of tools that you can use for process improvement, but just some of the sampling that we are going to potentially talk about today. So let's break it down a little bit farther and talk about some more of the details, shall we? Step number 1, understanding the system, forming a team, and defining the purpose. A lot goes into this first step. This is that first step that really gets us all going where we should be going. Forming a team, pulling us together around a common problem, revolving and seeing that we are going to be working all on the same thing. It also helps us see big picture, where does this meet maybe mission and vision and strategy. So it really grounds us to get started on the right foot. Within step 1, we would definitely want to form a team. There is a whole presentation out there on forming a team, so if you're interested, you can go listen to that. But teams should be about 6 to 10 people. That's a good size. A little smaller than that, you tend to miss out some opinions. A little bigger than that tends to be kind of hard to control. Teams should have a sponsor, meaning a senior leader that does not necessarily come to the meetings, but definitely is in support, helps break down barriers, helps communicate, and is really ultimately accountable. Then there's the team lead. This is the individual is a strong leader within the organization, but keep in mind they should not do much talking. They really should sit back and let those process owners and support owners do most of the talking. They're just kind of there for some overall guidance. And then we have the support owners and process owners. These are the folks from your organization that actually do the work that we're talking about improving. About 4 of those, if you have them, if you have a couple outside folks, the support owners that are from maybe a different department, they're a good kind of neutral eye. And then also the outsiders can be someone that can look in. Maybe it's a great way to engage a patient. And then last but not least, a facilitator, someone that knows the tools, knows the Plan, Do, Study, Act, but not necessarily intimate with the process that you're trying to improve. Some tools that we can use for teams and getting them started. The first one is the Code of Cooperation. So being able to look at the ground rules. The P3T is a great tool to create a purpose. We need that purpose for the team. And a scope document. So what's in bounds, what's out of bounds, what are we going to focus on, what's kind of narrow in this, and it helps your team focus again on purpose, scope, maybe its definition of key words, and ultimately look at our objectives and who all is on the team. We also need to think about documenting our team's progress. Excuse me. A common way to do that is through the A3 process. Now, A3 is a one-page strategy planning tool that helps you walk through your plan, do, study, act cycle. So here is an example of one kind of filled in, and it gives us an idea of moving through steps 1 through 9 in the plan, do, study, act phases. And you can see you would you'd probably take out the questions here, but you'd really work to move through the different steps and document the outcomes of each of those steps. You also need to think about understanding the system in step 1. So what's the system's purpose? Maybe how is it connected to others? And really understanding that what comes in affects what goes out and vice versa. You need to think about where does this process fit in amongst other processes within the organization. So step number 2 is talking about describing the problem. So this really helps you gain a team support and buy-in from everyone. It also helps us define what's the beginning, so what's, we're not going to go solve world peace, but really what's involved in this process and what's not involved in this process. Some good step 2 tools are looking at surveys. Maybe it's an interrelationship diagram. In other words, how do parts of this system affect each other? And then often we write a problem statement. And a problem statement should include the current, the impact of that current, and the desired state. We mentioned that surveys are a good step 2 tool. When we think about surveys, we want to think about who is your customer, what do they want, where do they want it, when do they want it, how do they want it to and how do they want it to perform. And so you think about the fact that if we can answer these questions about the customer, we are probably going to be starting off on the right foot. This also alludes to the fact that there would be added value to fixing what we are looking at. So what's the definition of added value? Added value is any activity that increases the market for or function of the service. So in other words, the product the customer is willing to pay for. So those are the things that we would say patients or customers value, and they would continue to return in services. Non-value or any of those, it's just really the opposite or considered a waste in our system. Those things that don't add form or function. And then last but not least, we have necessary non-value added, and those things are often defined as those things that keep our doors open. So these are the behind the scenes that don't necessarily affect the patient, but we still have to do them to keep our organization running. So step 3, we've moved on from understanding the system, selecting a team, defining the problem, and now we're to measuring current state. Really, we want to measure current state to get everybody all on the same page, drive forward, and set goals in a unified method. So there's lots of tools that we can use in step 3. There are data collection tools such as the ones you see here, a run chart, a control chart, and a checklist. And a common piece of a run chart is when you have information that you would like to display over time. And so what does that process look like, or how well is that process running over time? A control chart is that one where we would look at statistical kind of bumpers, if you will. So think of it as if a run chart is the bowling alley lane, the control is the bumper guards that keep you from going in the gutter. And that's what a control chart is. So it's a run chart with bumpers, if you will. We can also do a time study, which is collecting the time spent doing activities. And it helps us identify value in certain parts of the process versus others. A histogram is often known as similar to a bar chart. So being able to display how well we're doing. These are great tools if you want to display a before and an after, so you can see your changes. We also can have a Pareto diagram. A Pareto diagram is a little bit harder to create, but very, very valuable. What it does when we have a Pareto diagram is it allows us to understand where our impact or our bang for the buck is really going to be. We also have some visual mapping tools in step 3 that we can use to understand the current state. What it does is it helps us focus on the procedure all in the same time by creating a clear picture and creating a visual. And then we can identify tools and techniques that can identify waste, establishing baselines, and incorporating new ideas. It also helps us create an action plan, which really help us make up these new ideas. And we get increased buy-in to those new ideas and connects us to the why. It ultimately allows us for the real situation of what's happening within the organization. So we have mapping and flow tools. A flow is thinking about looking at where we're going or where people go or supplies go or equipment goes within the organization. Here's an example of a spaghetti diagram. It is a flow tool, a step number 3 flow tool. And what it does is it displays where in the area do people move. And you can see the lines would depict the movement within parts and pieces of the organization. And you can see quickly here that there's this area right here that creates a bottleneck. Creates a, if we had 4 or 5 people working in this area, we would have a congested area, and it does not allow us to have good flow. A value stream map is also another flow and mapping tool. What it does is it says here are the steps in the process. So I'm going to mark these up a little bit for you. This is a step, patient calls. Back in the old days, we used to pull the chart. We'd sort it out. We'd give it to the doctor to review it. He approves that maybe it's about a refill. And then last but not least, we send it to the pharmacy. And so what you see is the process steps. The boxes below it, this area here, allows us to document how much time is taken in this step. So low would mean worst case scenario. So how much, what's the best, it's the easiest amount of time. Average is just that, the average amount of time, and high is that worst case scenario. So what we do is we document the process steps, we document the time, and then we also can document the time in between steps. So again, these are considered wait time, and we know that absolutely nobody in our organization likes to wait, and so this makes us extremely unhappy, having a little fun there with my annotations, to have time in between. Moving on to step number 4. So we've moved through the first 3 phases of the plan. We have one more sub-step left in the plan, and that's to discover root cause analysis. We would really want to discover root cause because it's like creating a perfect diagnosis for a patient. And so we want to be very careful and make sure we're getting an accurate root cause. Underlying considering problems, we need to continue to create a solution for those problems, and it keeps us moving from current state to future state, all in the same process. So some tools for for step number 4, root cause analysis. These include the fishbone diagram, which looks something like a fish skeleton. The 5 whys, which ask us, why did that happen? And then you keep working down through the layers of those answers. We could use a parking lot, which gives us the idea of kind of what do we need for improvement and where are we going? And then last but not least, we could use an affinity diagram, which helps us understand the grouping of those problems. We can also use a tool from the lean world to identify waste for root cause. So there's 7 different types of waste: storage, transportation, overproduction, unnecessary processing, waiting, excess movements, and defects. Each and every one of these are things that drive out value, or non-value, if you will, in our organization, and creates a system where people are frustrated, upset, and really don't want to work. We mentioned earlier that there's a fishbone, and here's just a little bit of description of what those fins on that fishbone mean. So now we have finally moved out of the plan and into the do. We get to steps 5 and 6. This is where we've studied, maybe we've diagnosed, we've looked at, we said this is where we think the problems are. This is where we create a plan for improvement, and we start to actually implement or do that plan. Once the do has been done, then we can move on to step 7 and look at it and say, where do we need to standardize? Where is it ultimately to study it and be able to, so step 7 is our idea of studying the results and standardizing where we can. So some step 7 tools include flowcharts, checklists, and visuals. And then step 8 is creating that standard work. Step 8 and 9, if you remember back to the list, are moving into the act phase. And so you see that when we create standard work, we roll out, this is the new and improved. This is now the new process. And we can allow individuals within our organization to say, okay, I understand I used to do it this way, but now I'm going to do it a new way. And then last but not least, we need to work on continuous improvement. And so we need to think about having an ever-evolving cycle of improvement. We call that lowering the water line, that there's always more kind of hidden underneath, if you will. And it starts us off on the right foot for the next phase or the next improvement cycle. So some tools that we can use are audits, surveys, sampling, and don't forget to go back to your parking lot, or even looking at a systems progress, which is what you see here. It would be a display of the past, the present, and the future. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions via email. You see my email listed there. I want to say thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope you've learned a little bit about the Plan, Do, Study, Act. And again, please reach out to your Compass PTN contact or anyone within our system, and we're happy to help. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.